Welcome to Real Wisdom, where we dive into the real stories of remarkable women. Today, I'm excited to introduce Susie Miles. She's the host of the Cooking and Convos podcast. Susie's journey has been truly inspiring. She spent over 20 years in TV production, but then she took a brave leap and followed her true calling. On her podcast, she shares simple recipes and has heartfelt conversations that, bring people together through the joy of food. And if you're curious to hear more stories like this, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Hi, Susie. I'm so excited to have you here today. I've had I've had the privilege of talking to a lot of women who are doing really cool things this past year. But what I'm most excited about is I've never talked to anybody who was passionate about cooking, and I love to cook. So I'm really excited to have you on the podcast today.
Well,
So
thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I'm glad. I think that the beautiful thing about your journey is that sometimes we have to accept change and decide to do something different. And could be scary sometimes because you spent over 2 decades as a television producer or in television.
Yes.
And now you're hosting a podcast. You're doing something really different.
Yes.
What was that moment when you decided, I need some change in my life?
Well, it really was a slow process. I had been feeling the tug really for a couple of years. I had been in television for all of my career, and I felt something calling me, saying there has to be something more. I think I had done everything I wanted to do in television. I had worked at some wonderful places, and I began to really enjoy listening to podcasts. I love the intimacy of it. I love the fact that you don't really have to worry about the visuals, at least when I was listening early on to podcasts. It was really only audio. Now it's moving into video. But I just loved it. It took me away on my commutes to and from the office, on walks. And I thought, I think I'd like to possibly step into podcasting. I was a little nervous about it, but I'd kind of planned for it. I had put away some money each year, and I said, if I'm going to make a change, this will be the year to make it. And that was a few years ago. It was a little scary to go from making good money to making virtually no money, but I had saved for it, so I was prepared for that part.
What type of podcast did you like to listen to?
Well, I like to listen to all kinds of podcasts. I like listening to cooking podcasts. I liked listening to midlife podcasts that focused on midlife. And there was one podcast that was very encouraging on thinking about quitting your day job. And I had listened to the host interview many, many people who had made the change for themselves. And I thought, if they can do it, I can do it. I felt like I was a fairly smart person, although a nervous person, to make the big change. But I thought, look, at least for me, we only have so many decades left. And I didn't want to live in my head any longer. I wanted to actually do what I was feeling and what I was thinking.
I like you saying that living in your head. I feel so many so many of us can get caught up in that space, and you think, I'd really like to try these different things, and you talk yourself out of it before it even
Totally.
begins.
Absolutely, absolutely. And really, what did it for me is I mapped out, okay, how much would I need for a year's salary? And I just would put away a little bit each month. And I also realized that no one's going to be doing this for me. And again, the living in your head aspect, there's only so many days you can keep daydreaming because your days, not that I'm dying anytime soon, but they're limited. And so I don't have decades to work on things. I need to do things fairly quickly if I'm going to place myself in a new situation. So I was very motivated and glad I did it. I don't regret it at all.
Well, you do sound like a very good planner, and
Yes.
that probably helped you
Absolutely.
make that transition.
Yes, absolutely. And I know some people don't have that luxury. I know it does take a lot of planning, and some people are living hand to mouth. They need their
Yeah.
paycheck. But I tell you out there, there is some change you can take from your paycheck each week. If you don't need the Starbucks every day, I don't think. You don't need the various, premium channels. I think if you just take a little bit out of each category, you really can save some money. And it adds up.
Well, it might even be that you want to quit your job, but maybe it's
Like,
for taking a class or buying a camera or something that's going to
absolutely.
move that forward. In your podcast, you kind of blended two different things, cooking and having meaningful conversations. Where did you come up with that idea?
Well, I love having people over and having conversations in my kitchen, having conversations on my porch. And I really am the kind of person that would rather have deeper conversations than to talk about the weather. I kind of get bored about that. I get bored if I'm going to a party and people just talk about things on the surface. I sort of doze out after the third conversation about weather or, whatever it is that I find kind of dull. So I wanted to combine the two. And so I thought, how about cooking and convos? And I do solo episodes. And I also, interview people who are experts in the field or they're passionate about cooking or they have something to add to the conversation around the area of cooking and the kitchen.
You mentioned having people over in your kitchen or on the porch, and I always love conversations on the porch. I don't know why. There's something about being outside, and if you have somebody over and they're going to sit on the porch with you, are you going to serve a little something? Are you famous for, iced tea or something like
Well,
that?
funny thing is I don't drink iced tea normally, but it depends on the time of day. If they're coming over in the morning after a walk, then I'll serve coffee or tea. If it's in
Mhm.
the evening, I like to have a little wine, maybe a little charcuterie, or if they're coming over for dinner, then I'll have, a little bit of appetizers and then we'll have dinner either on the porch or in my kitchen or in my dining room. So it really depends on the time of day.
When it comes to cooking, has there been a certain influence or somebody in your life that maybe you thought of when you thought, I'm going to have a podcast and it's going to include cooking? Was there an influence that comes to mind?
Well, there is a person who his name is Roger, and he hosts a podcast called The Kitchen Counter. And I had listened to his podcast for a couple of years, and he actually started out when podcasting was in its infancy. And he's been doing it ever since. And he doesn't sell anything. He doesn't really promote himself on Instagram too often. And I really loved his approach. He also does solo episodes and he also interviews people. But he inspired me just because he has a very relaxed way about him. And I didn't want my podcast to be too loud or too, in your face, I'm the greatest cook, because in all honesty, I'm not the greatest cook. I'm just a cook that likes to make good food fairly quickly. I don't want to spend tons of time in the kitchen unless maybe it's a cold Sunday and I want to make a couple of meals for the week. But I'm really not, if, I don't consider myself a fantastic cook. Some of my friends think I'm a good cook, but I don't tout myself as that. And so I just want to be able to help people who want good food at the end of the day, help them plan a little bit, either the day before, the morning of, and just help them plan and make good food too. So anyway, Roger was the first person that inspired me. But a long, long time ago was my mother. She always cooked delicious meals when I was young. And I just, I think, carry that with me.
Did you spend time with her in the kitchen?
I did. Unfortunately, she passed away very young, but I did spend time with her in the kitchen. And there was a period where I had to cook for my younger brother and sister every night and prepare their dinners when I was very young in my teens. So I think that started my passion and love for really the dinner time. I mean, I look forward to dinner in the morning, I look forward to the day before. So I think maybe it germinated from that time in my life and it's really just stuck with me.
Yeah, because that could have been a challenging time, but it
Yes,
it sounds like something really beautiful came out of that, and
absolutely.
learning a love for cooking and sharing. I always feel like sharing a meal with someone, especially when times are difficult, can really bring people together, and you bond over things like that.
Sure, sure, absolutely. And dinner really, I feel that time of day is just the time of day to let your worries go and just be able to enjoy each other, whoever you're with, or even if you're cooking for yourself. It's just a time to sort of reflect and bring everything down a notch or two notches.
When you think about your episodes, do you script them out? Do you have something in mind, or is it seasonal, or how are you inspired by your podcast?
Sure, that's a very good question. It is seasonal for the most part. I took a break this summer and I'm now going to be writing some new episodes, but I do write my own scripts when I'm doing solo episodes. I do map out the questions that I am going to be asking of my guest based on who they are, where they're from in the world, and the type of food I know they like to make. I had actually a wine expert on one of my episodes. I knew she really liked wine, so I blended that conversation into the overall conversation of her cooking. She loves wine and also cooking good food. So it really is based on who the person is I'm interviewing. But yes, I do map it out ahead of time. And I usually create 2 at a time, 3 at a time, if I'm doing any freelancing or if I'm doing anything else to earn money.
Didn't you have someone on your podcast, and it was about pies, their love of
Oh, yes.
pies?
Wasn't that a lovely episode? I just adored
It
her.
was.
Yes, yes. She wrote a book and she had picked and devised a pie for every state of the United States. And it was a lot of fun talking with her. And her book is wonderful.
Yeah, I thought that was such an interesting concept for a book. But when you really think about it, each state is kind of, whether it's apple or, cherry and peaches in the South. I loved it. I thought that was such a creative way to think about pie. And
Agree. I completely agree.
if you ask anybody who knows me, I do love pie.
Oh, Judy, what is your
I
favorite pie?
peach. I'm not that great at baking them myself.
Hmm.
I think I don't have the patience for making
Oh,
crust.
completely
So,
agree. Me either.
right. I think if I could skip that part, I love the filling. So I usually will cheat
Mhm.
and buy a store-bought crust. But
I do too.
that
I'm with you.
between the two of us, nobody else is gonna know that, right?
Exactly. Now, do you like ice cream to top it off, or do you like homemade whipped cream?
Oh, I guess it depends on the pie.
Mhm,
But
mhm,
if it's a warm pie that I'm taking out of the oven, you definitely need ice cream.
mhm.
I don't think you could skip that part.
Right.
Um, but like your pecan pie or something like that, a little bit of homemade whipped cream
Yes.
can really set things apart.
Completely, completely.
And that's not that hard to make.
No,
I have discovered that myself.
very easy. And you can augment it. If I'm making an apple pie, sometimes I'll add cinnamon to the whipped cream and a little vanilla. So if you can augment the whipped cream, which is lovely to do, add a little lemon or lime zest.
Right? It's just that little touch that kind of
Yeah.
brightens it up and makes it really fun. Well, I'm glad that you like pie too, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about. But maybe that'll be a different episode. So, yeah, you've made kind of a big career pivot, and that can be kind of a scary thing to do. And it sounds like you thought about it for a while. It just wasn't something that happened overnight. What do you think was the bravest decision that you made when that idea came into your head?
I think the bravest decision I made was to actually do it because, to be honest, I started out taking a class on how to podcast because my goal was to become a podcast producer. And one of the assignments was to create your own podcast. So I was very nervous and I thought, in all honesty, I did want my own podcast. I just couldn't admit it to myself. I thought when I was working in television, I want to work in the podcasting field, but I never really thought I'd have my own podcast. And to do it and to upload it and to drop it on the host platform, I was so nervous. I thought no one's going to believe me, no one's going to take me seriously. I'm a fraud. Who am I to do this? But as long as I think you're honest along the way, again, I don't tout myself as a Julia Child, and really there was no reason to be nervous. I was doing something I wanted to do, and I then sort of put that aside. I put my fear aside and just said, this is something I want to do, and people are going to like you or they're not. And that's the way it is in real life. People like you and some people don't. So I'm not here to please the world. I want to please myself and also want to help a few people along the way to try to better their food lives.
Did you get any input? Did you share this with anyone Because I know when I have dreams or the little things that I think of, that's the scary part is telling somebody else.
Totally, completely. It made me feel like I was on stage and I was just very nervous about feedback. And so some of my friends started listening and they said, you're really good. I don't know, maybe because they're my friends, they're going to tell me that. There's always room for improvement. I'm constantly tweaking myself. And so I hope one day that I'll be, in a place where I just feel like I've really hit every note. It's a work in progress. And so I've been doing it a couple of years. I want to do it for a couple of more at least. And I love learning and meeting people. That's the fun thing I think about podcasting when you're interviewing people is just finding out who people are and finding your commonalities and finding out for me, how do you plan your food life? What do you eat? How do you prepare? What's your week look like on a regular basis? So I have fun doing it.
I think sometimes my planning goes I have good intentions at the start of the week,
Yeah, right.
but life happens and it
Absolutely.
kind of do you have are you very deliberate about your cooking for the week, your planning?
I typically am, but there are some days it just depends what happens. I like to work out in the morning, and sometimes if my day is really hectic, I'll nix the bigger meal I was planning. Like for example, today was really, really busy. I had lots of appointments. And so I'm going to make it easy on myself and just make some steamed shrimp, make some, easy broccoli and just call it a day. Maybe have some rolls or something. So I do plan it out, but there are some times and some days that kind of go out the window, and that's okay as long as I'm having something tasty, something that's good for me and healthy, I'm happy. So you're right. You start out with a week with all these plans, and sometimes they can go awry because I'm not perfect either.
Right, and also I think it's the part I love grocery shopping, especially if you can try different markets or
Oh,
different things
sure.
like that, but there's always that moment where you're like, do I really wanna do that?"
I know, because it is intense to go. I go to 3 or 4 grocery stores myself, and I like to hit them all. I try to at least in one day. Sometimes that doesn't always work, but yeah, it can be a pain. I mean, who's kidding who? You got to manage a lot of things. Everyone's busy, and we don't necessarily want to always spend our time in the grocery store. So I get it.
You know, for a lot of women in midlife, they feel that pull to take a risk or to reinvent themselves, but it can be really scary and you don't always have that support. But what would you say to someone who feels that pull? Like what are the first steps that you would encourage them to take?
Well, I guess the question I would have for that person is what is pulling you and why? And what is it that you're drawn to? Do you have an end goal in mind? Are you just thinking at the very beginning stages? But I'm a fan of writing things down. Every morning I write, and I'm sure a lot of women do as well, write down the list for the day and write down some of my whys. But I think that's the big thing is if something is pulling you, really write down why is it pulling you and where do you ultimately want to go with it. I had this idea to write a children's book for maybe 3 decades, and I was so afraid to do it. I thought I didn't have the talent, and I decided, you know what? If it takes me 2 years, it'll take me 2 years. You do something teeny tiny every day toward it, even if it's something little. And so at the end of that 2-year period of actually doing those little daily things, it makes a difference. So I would tell that person just to write down what it is you want and where do you envision yourself, and then figure out the steps that that's going to take and what's really involved, and start writing some things down. If you have to put stickies in your office, step 1, step 2, I mean, really, you get down to the basics here, whatever it's going to take to motivate you. Because again, as we're in midlife now, we don't have many decades left. So I feel from talking with other people, there is this sense of urgency. Like, if I don't do it now, when am I going to do it? And that's kind of the truth. I mean, you can hold off until your 60s or 70s if you'd like, but if it's a long road and it's going to take a little while, so I'd say start as soon as you can and really get honest with yourself without worrying about what anybody else thinks. And that's the hardest thing. I think as women,
Mhm.
we grow up worrying about what people think, and that is a big one. What will people think? They see me, not me as a lawyer, but I'm a lawyer, been a lawyer for 30 years. What are they going to think if I work in a pie shop? I just it takes a lot of soul searching, I think.
Well, I think people are afraid that, let's say you're a lawyer, you've spent a lot of years educating yourself, and then you step back from it. I always get the feeling that people think, like, what did you do wrong? You know
No,
what I'm
yeah,
saying?
absolutely. Like you didn't get it right, but I think because we're living longer and have all these bonus decades, life can be a series of acts and phases. You've done the lawyer phase. Okay, 30 years, you've done it. Who are you really answering to? But you really should be answering to yourself.
Mhm.
So I think people shouldn't view life that way any longer. They should just say, I'm pivoting, I'm going all in, I'm leaning in, and let's see what happens. And that can be kind of fun just to not know what's going to be happening in a year from now, but know you're going to do your best to try to figure that out.
I do want to get back to, though, to your children's book, because I love the idea behind that, and I loved the title, "My Friend the
Oh,
Light,"
thank you.
and it really resonated with me because I have two sons, and when they were little, if we didn't have a nightlight on in that room, it was not going to be a good night.
Right.
It sounds like it's a really heartwarming story. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and your experiences as a mom? How did that help you write this book?
Well, it really started out when my son was very, very young. And the book is about a little boy, a toddler, who is afraid of the dark, but who also, the parents want the child to go to bed. But it's all about the nightlight becoming the little boy's best friend and making him feel safe at night. And I think it, resonates with some parents who have young kids who, bedtime can be a hard time. It can be stressful at the end of a workday. And I think if children can learn to embrace a little friend, their little nightlight, it can help them go to bed a little bit more softly and maybe more sweetly. And so the inspiration came from my son in the very beginning. And whenever I would rock him in the middle of the night, I would see his eyes gaze toward the nightlight, and then he would just fall right asleep. And I said, one day I'm going to write a book. And I always found excuses over the years not to. I'm not talented. If I can't. But I did a little bit each day, and it came into fruition. And then a couple of years ago, I gave it to each of my children as a Christmas present. So that was really special to me, and that was just a high point in my life.
What a beautiful memory. And then to be able to turn it into something that has a lasting impact like that. It's just, did you have the idea for the illustrations and how you wanted it to look?
I did in my mind, and I'm a horrible artist, but I was taking a walk with a girlfriend one day, and she said, I have a friend who's a great artist. And I had been, sampling different artists along the way. No one was hitting the mark, but then I met with her over the phone. It was during COVID time. And
Mhm.
she sent me a sketch, and I'm like, this is exactly what I'm looking for. You are it. And so she was in Pennsylvania, I was in Virginia, and we just shared notes and we did calls, and she sent me samples and I tweaked them. And but ultimately, she was just the perfect artist for me and for the book.
I did, as a side note, I did order it on
Oh,
Amazon,
you're
and I
sweet.
wanted to hear it today so that I could go through it with you. But
Thank you.
um, is the little boy on the cover, is that how you picture your son when he was?
Yes, definitely. He was the inspiration.
You mentioned briefly when I was asking you about encouraging women to do something, the importance of having a why. It's just interesting that you brought it up because I was having this conversation recently with someone about your why, and when you're struggling to find that, have you ever had that experience or have a little nugget of wisdom if a woman doesn't have that why in her life right now? How do we find that?
Well, I mean, everybody is unique and everyone has passions, whether they verbalize them or not. And I think you have to figure out and find what lights you up. What lights you up? What gets you out of bed every day? What do you think about when you're, thinking when you're in a meeting and sort of going through your mind and thinking different thoughts? What is it that you feel passionate about? And I would say, you know, if there's something, a little hobby, let's say you want to step into glassmaking and you just have thought about it, but why not take a class on glass? Why not take, if you wanted to write a memoir, why not take a memoir writing class? I mean,
Mhm.
just do something toward it. You may decide, you know what, I don't think I want to now, but at least you tried it. At least you put yourself out there. So I would say, really listen to yourself, take some walks by yourself, and or spend some alone time without, your phone next to you, and the TV, the kids, all that, and just figure out what does light you up. And I would start from there, because I know there are a lot of women out there who don't even know what they like. They just know they don't like what they're doing, or they just know they're unhappy. So I think it takes a lot of quiet time to figure out your passions and what other field you might like to work in, or even if it's hobbies you want to delve into that could give you meaning and purpose. Because it's all about meaning and purpose, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a job, but find out what you enjoy, who you enjoy being around, what do you enjoy doing, the type of people you like to be around. It really takes a lot of sort of going to the granular level with yourself,
Mhm.
I think.
And I think part of that comes from, you know, you're a mom, you spend decades raising children, and now all of a sudden you find yourself with a substantial amount of time, and
Yeah.
it's hard to figure out what it is then that you want to fill that with.
Absolutely. So I say, just try as many different things as you can, and something will, I think, resonate eventually. I think if you get quiet with yourself enough, and also, what matters too, and what's really significant is the people you hang around. Are you
Mhm.
hanging around healthy people? Are you hanging around people who are inspirational to you? And if you're not, I would say try to get around those people. And I know it's like, where do you find these people? But there are all kinds of groups people can join. There's so many different types of groups out there, even if it's a Facebook group to start out with. I think that helps too. I think just having conversations with people and being around other individuals, we all need connection. Sometimes that connection can sprout something you didn't even know was inside you.
We feel like it has to be a formal connection of some kind, but
Yes.
it could happen in the grocery store, or it could happen on a walk, or you meet a new neighbor that you've been meaning to bring something over for.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think we just have to be willing to let that happen and be open to those kinds of
And
experiences.
that may seem very risky or may feel very risky for someone, but I'd say, I mean, now again, now is such the time. Maybe you're a person that doesn't invite people over or doesn't ask people, or you don't ask people out for a walk, but I'd say just do it, because most of the time people will say yes. People want to be around people. I think it's in our DNA. So I
Yes.
think that could help along the way, just to get some support and to talk things through with someone.
You know, one of the things I wanted to ask you though is that um because you're talking about you took some time off and now you're making thinking about things that you want to talk about next on your podcast. Is there a famous chef, or maybe not so famous, that would be your dream to have on the show, and what would you ask them?
Oh boy, that's a good question. There are so many great chefs out there. I really love Bobby Flay. I'd love to have him on, although I think he's a little too big for my little podcast. Giada De Laurentiis, I'd like to have her
Yeah.
on. Um, and I love watching Beat Bobby Flay. It's on Thursday nights. I really love that show. I love seeing people come up with meals instantaneously once an ingredient is given. But I do like Bobby Flay a lot.
Do you enjoy watching any of the like competition cooking shows? I fell in love with the British baking show. I love that show so much.
Yeah, a lot of people love that show. Normally I don't. I usually like to get into a series on Netflix or Hulu. I tend not to watch the cooking competition shows, but this show, Beat Bobby Flay, is a competition show. So I would say that is the only competition show I watch. But I know there are so many good ones out there.
I'm going to ask you a very strange question, but I love asking this because I like to get to know people in a way that I wouldn't be able to find out any other way. And we all carry a purse or a bag around with us all the time. What are three things that you have in that you is a must have in your bag all the time, and what's the reason behind them?
Well, I have to have chapstick. I use chapstick often. I have to have a little journal because I write on my phone a lot, but I find when I write notes to myself on my phone, I don't go back to them. But if it's on paper, I can write a lot of things down at any given point. So I always have a little journal and of course my wallet, but I also always have hand sanitizer because if I'm going out to a restaurant, I always want to make sure that my hands are clean or if I'm going out with my kids or anybody else who needs it. So those are 3 things. Boring, I
It's
know.
it's funny, I've asked that question a couple of times, and the first thing is always the chapstick.
Oh, is it really?
Always. Oh,
Yeah,
I guess that I don't know, it's just a fun thing I think we all toss in our purse.
yeah.
What about, journaling? Is that something that you do daily? Do you incorporate into your life at all?
I wish I could say that I do journaling at night or, writing down my thoughts. If something is bothering me or I have a big decision to make, or if I have a lot of changes coming down the pike, I will journal and write down my thoughts. But normally I'll journal in the morning, and that journaling really is a list. It's a list of things I have to do. And, you know, I don't always get to everything on the list, but it sort of clears my head. I feel like I'm starting the day out powerfully, and I try to get as much as I can done. And I would like to journal more at night, but sometimes I like to read a book at night, or I like to take a walk, or I like to get into a series. So it depends on what I'm doing, but most of the time I don't journal. I think just my list making is kind of my journaling. It's like my meditation in a
Okay.
way. I know that sounds kind of ridiculous because meditation, you're supposed to clear your mind and not really focus on any one thing. But to me, it helps helps kind of organize my brain for the day.
Well, it helps you feel like a little sense of control over what's gonna
Absolutely.
happen.
Yeah, right.
If we can control our day at all, that's, one way of doing it.
Do you journal?
I do.
Love for
I've
you.
gotten into the habit lately, probably the last year. I don't know if you've ever read the book An Artist's
Oh,
Way.
yes. Yes, very
Yes.
famous.
I met Julia at a book signing, years ago, and it was one of the I
Oh,
had this book on my bookshelf, and then this past year, I've really taken it to heart, and I try to journal every morning, and it's just that little part of my day that I know is just for myself, and yeah, I love it.
that's
I love it.
nice. That sounds like it's very centering to you, so that's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You mentioned reading. Can I just put you on the spot? Do you have a book that you could recommend to us right now or something that you're reading that you'd want to share?
Well, I'm starting right now. I actually downloaded on Audible this morning. It's called This Is How It Always Is. Let me look it up. Sorry to get the author's name. But I'm started listening to that on my walk this morning. And the author's name is actually, it's called This Is How It Always Is by Lori Frankel. And so that's part of a book club book. I have a little book club in my neighborhood. And so that's our task for this month.
Well, before I let you go today, can you just let us know what you have on the horizon or how we could follow along on your journey and your podcast? Where can we find you?
Oh, sure. Well, I have two Instagram sites. One is at Susie Miles 88, and the other is at Cookie and Convos podcast. And I'll be honest, I have not been posting for the past like 8 or 9 months. It's not something I'm really comfortable with. I don't know if you are, but I just haven't been doing it a lot. But I plan to get back into it. I'm starting my new episodes will be starting and they'll be running monthly on Cookie and Convos. And my first episode will be on bruschetta, which is one of my favorite side dishes with a lot of meals that I create. So those are the two areas where you can reach me, and you can look up Cookie and Convos on any hosting platform, Apple, Spotify,
I'm really looking forward to hearing more episodes
Thank
and
you.
thank you so much for taking the time today. This has really been a very lovely conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed being here.
Thank you for joining us on Real Wisdom. If you're inspired by stories like this and want to be part of a community that celebrates the wisdom of women, visit joinempart.com and become a part of our conversation. And don't forget to subscribe for even more real wisdom. Until next time, keep embracing your story.